A waitress told the vampire king, "Sir, my mother has a tattoo just like yours." What happened next? Your tea, traveler. Careful, the porcelain is thin as a winter prayer. Magnolia Hawklight set the cup down, her fingers trembling just enough to ripple the dark liquid. The man before her didn't look like a traveler. He looked like the storm itself, draped in midnight velvet and smelling of ozone and ancient cedar. As he reached for the saucer, his cuff slid back, revealing a mark etched in shimmering obsidian ink, a thorned rose entwined with a weeping eye. Magnolia froze. Her breath hitched, catching in the back of a dry throat. "Sir," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the crowded tavern. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours. She said it was a curse. She died trying to wash it off in the river." The stranger's hand stilled. His eyes, the color of a bruised twilight, snapped up to hers. In that moment, the air in the room died, replaced by a pressure so heavy it felt like the mountain itself had leaned in to listen. The village of Oakhaven was a place where the sun felt like an uninvited guest, always leaving too early and arriving too late. Tucked into the jagged armpit of the Ironland Mountains, it was a town of woodcutters, weavers, and the weary. Magnolia Hawklight was the latter. At 23, her life was measured in the rhythm of shifting plates and the dull roar of the fireplace at the Silver Thistle. The tavern was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the scent of roasting mutton and spilled ale masked the pervasive smell of damp earth and rot that seemed to seep from the nearby woods. Magnolia liked the noise. It kept the ghosts of her childhood, the memories of a mother who spoke to the moon and a father who disappeared into the mist, at bay. That evening, the frost was clawing at the window panes, sketching crystalline maps of lands Magnolia would never see. She moved through the room with a practiced, ghost-like grace, her apron stained with the day's labor. Then, the door opened. It wasn't the sound that alerted her. It was the silence. It moved inward from the threshold, a wave of absolute stillness that swallowed the laughter of the regulars and the rhythmic thumping of Leopold Ironland's heavy boots against the floorboards. Leopold, the town's most formidable blacksmith, went quiet mid-sentence, his hammer calloused hand freezing around his tankard. Magnolia turned. He stood in the doorway, a tall silhouette framed by the swirling white chaos of a blizzard. He didn't shake the snow from his cloak. It seemed to evaporate before it could touch the fabric. He stepped inside, and the temperature in the room plummeted. He chose a table in the furthest corner, a shadow among shadows. "Magnolia," her boss, Damien Fairford, hissed from behind the bar. His face was the color of curdled milk. "Go. See what he wants. And for the love of the saints, don't look him in the eye." Magnolia took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. She grabbed a clean rag and a tray, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a bird trapped in a cage of bone. As she approached, the sensory details hit her with the force of a physical blow. The stranger didn't smell like a man. He smelled of deep earth, of the sharp tang of a coming lightning strike, and something sweet like crushed violets on a grave. His skin was the color of moonlight on marble, flawless and terrifyingly pale. His hair was a chaotic spill of ink-black silk, shadowing a face carved from the kind of masculine beauty that felt like a warning. "Tea," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in the floorboards beneath her feet. It was a cello's low vibrato, smooth and dangerous. "Dark. No sugar." Magnolia nodded, unable to find her voice. She retreated, her hands shaking as she prepared the pot. When she returned, she forced herself to be steady. She set the cup down, and that was when she saw it. The mark on his wrist. It wasn't a common sailor's ink or a guild brand. It was a complex, swirling geometry of thorns and a central, weeping eye that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. It was the exact image she had seen every night of her childhood, etched onto the collarbone of her mother, Celestine Crowvale. Celestine had spent her final years scrubbing at it with lye and pumice until her skin was raw and weeping, claiming it was a beacon for a king who would one day come to reclaim his debt. "Sir," Magnolia whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours. She said it was a curse. She died trying to wash it off in the river." The stranger didn't move for a long heartbeat. Then he looked up. Magnolia felt a jolt of pure, electrical terror. His eyes weren't human. The pupils were too wide, the irises a shifting kaleidoscope of violet and obsidian. He reached out, his fingers closing around her wrist. His skin was ice, but where he touched her, a searing heat flared, mirroring the mark hidden beneath her own high-collared bodice, a mark she had never told a soul about. "Your mother's name," he demanded, his grip tightening just enough to be felt, but not to bruise. "Celestine," she breathed. "Celestine Crowvale." The stranger's expression shifted. The predatory coldness didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of ancient, agonizing recognition. "The Crowvale line was supposed to be extinguished," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He stood up, towering over her. The tavern remained frozen, the other patrons looking like wax figures in the dim amber light. "I am Cedric Stormheart," he said, and the name carried the weight of a crown. "And you, Magnolia Hawklight, are the reason the stars have been screaming for a century." He didn't give her a choice. He didn't ask. He simply draped his cloak over her shoulders, and as the heavy velvet settled around her, the world of the tavern, the smell of ale, the fear of Damien, the safety of the mundane, dissolved into a swirl of shadows and snow. The transition from the warmth of the tavern to the heart of the blizzard was instantaneous and jarring. Magnolia expected to be blinded by the wind, to feel the bite of the frost against her cheeks. Instead, she felt nothing but the rhythmic thud of a horse's gallop and the terrifyingly steady heat of Cedric's chest against her back. He had her gathered in front of him on a beast that defied nature, a stallion the size of a war wagon, its coat as black as a starless pit, its hooves striking the frozen ground with the sound of falling boulders. "Where are you taking me?" Magnolia shouted, her voice whipped away by the gale. "To the only place where you won't be hunted," Cedric replied near her ear. His breath didn't mist in the air. "The world is waking up, Magnolia. They smelled your blood the moment you spoke that name." "Who? Who is hunting me?" "The Ironland Council. The ones who promised your mother a life of peace in exchange for the location of the Heartstone. They lied to her, and they will kill you to ensure the secret dies with the last Crowvale." Magnolia gripped the pommel of the saddle, her knuckles white. Her life had been a series of quiet days and long nights. Now, she was a fugitive on a nightmare horse, held by a man who claimed to be a king of shadows. She should have been screaming. She should have been fighting. But as the forest blurred past them, the trees looking like skeletal hands reaching out to snatch them from the air, she felt a strange, terrifying sense of belonging. The heat radiating from Cedric wasn't just physical, it felt like a frequency her own soul was beginning to tune into. The mark on her collarbone began to itch, then burn. It was a slow, pulsing heat, timed perfectly to the beat of Cedric's heart. "Look at me," he commanded. She turned her head as much as the pace allowed. His face was a mask of grim determination. The violet in his eyes was glowing now, cutting through the dark like twin lanterns. "You are afraid," he noted. It wasn't an observation of weakness. It was a statement of fact. "I am a waitress," she managed to say. "I serve tea. I don't belong in stories like this." "The stories don't care what you do for a living, Magnolia. They only care who you are when the light fails." Suddenly the horse reared back, letting out a sound that was less a neigh and more a roar. A tree trunk, thick as a house, crashed onto the path ahead of them. From the shadows of the pines, figures emerged. They wore armor of dull grey iron, and their eyes glowed with an artificial, alchemical yellow. "Leopold!" Magnolia gasped, recognizing the lead figure. It was the blacksmith from the tavern, but he looked different. His muscles were swollen to unnatural proportions, and his skin was covered in etched runes that hummed with a sickly light. "Step aside, Stormheart," Leopold growled, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "The girl belongs to the council. The blood debt must be paid." Cedric didn't flinch. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, lifting Magnolia down and shielding her with his body. He drew a sword that seemed to be made of solidified smoke. "The debt was paid in Celestine's tears," Cedric said, his voice dropping to a register that made the very air vibrate. "I am the king of the unspoken. I do not negotiate with dogs who wear iron collars." The skirmish was a blur of violence that Magnolia could barely comprehend. Cedric moved like a flicker of candlelight, here one moment, there the next. There was no clashing of steel, only the sound of air being shredded and the wet thud of bodies hitting the snow. He wasn't just fighting, he was dancing a lethal, ancient ballet. Leopold lunged, his massive iron hammer swinging in a wide arc. Cedric caught the head of the hammer with his bare hand. The sound of metal groaning under his grip was deafening. "Go back to your masters," Cedric hissed, his face inches from Leopold's. "Tell them the rose has bloomed in the frost." With a surge of strength, Cedric flung the blacksmith back into the trees. The other guards hesitated, then retreated into the dark, their yellow eyes flickering out like dying embers. Cedric turned to Magnolia. He was breathing hard, and for the first time, she saw a smudge of red on his cheek. Not his own blood, but a spray from his enemies. He looked monstrous. He looked magnificent. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He seemed to hesitate, his fingers trembling with a restraint that looked painful. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered. "Good. Because we have reached the gates." Magnolia looked past him. Emerging from the blizzard was a structure that defied the laws of architecture. It was a fortress of black glass and white bone, perched on a spire of rock that pierced the clouds. It was the Stormheart Citadel, the place where the sun never rose, and where the king of the vampires kept his lonely vigil. As the massive gates swung open, Magnolia felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. The mark on her skin flared with a blinding white light, and for a second she saw a vision. Her mother, young and beautiful, standing in this very courtyard, holding a silver rose. "Mother?" Magnolia cried out, but the vision vanished. She felt Cedric catch her as her knees gave way. "Welcome home, Magnolia," he whispered, his voice tinged with a sadness that spanned centuries. "I have waited a very long time for you to return the Heartstone." The interior of the citadel was a labyrinth of contradictions. The walls were made of obsidian that reflected the flickering torchlight like a dark mirror, but the air was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and old parchment. It was a tomb that felt like a garden. Cedric carried Magnolia through a series of vaulted hallways, his footsteps echoing like heartbeats. He eventually placed her on a bed draped in furs of white fox. The room was circular, with high, narrow windows that looked out over the churning grey sea of the clouds. "Rest," he said, turning to leave. "Wait," she called out. "You mentioned a heart stone, and my mother. You knew her, didn't you?" Cedric paused at the door, his silhouette cutting a sharp line against the hallway light. "I didn't just know her, Magnolia. She was my herald, the one who kept the balance between my kind and yours. When she fled, she took the only thing that could keep the curse from consuming me. The Heartstone? Yes, a gem born from the first tear of the moon. It sits in the center of my chest, keeping the hunger at bay. Without it, I am nothing but a beast with a crown." He stepped back into the room, his eyes searching hers. "She took it to save me from myself. She thought if she hid it, I would become human. She didn't realize that without it, I would simply fade into the dark, and the world would fall to the Ironland Council." Magnolia touched her collarbone. Is it in me?" "No," Cedric said, approaching the bed. He sat on the edge, the weight of him causing the mattress to dip. "It is not in you. You are it. The stone didn't just hide, it transformed. It became the blood in your veins, the breath in your lungs. Your mother didn't hide a gem. She gave birth to a miracle." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of destiny. Magnolia looked at her hands, the hands of a waitress, scarred by steam and soap. She was a miracle. She was the life force of a vampire king. "That's why they want me," she realized, her voice trembling, "to kill me and take the stone back." "They want to harvest you," Cedric said, his jaw tightening. "They believe that by refining your blood, they can achieve immortality without the burden of the night. They are alchemists of the soul, and they are greedy." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A woman entered, her hair a shock of silver white, her eyes a kind, mossy green. She carried a tray of broth and bread. "This is Ambrosia Thornhaven," Cedric introduced. "She is the only one I trust with your care." Ambrosia smiled, a gentle, sad expression. "You look so much like her, child." The same fire in the eyes, the same stubborn set of the chin. "You knew my mother too?" Magnolia asked, reaching for the broth. "I helped her escape," Ambrosia whispered, glancing at Cedric. "I saw what the hunger was doing to him. I thought we were doing the right thing." Cedric stood up, his face unreadable. "The right thing has led us to the edge of the abyss, Ambrosia. Now, we must find a way to extract the essence of the stone without destroying the vessel." "Extract it?" Magnolia's heart skipped a beat. "You mean you're going to kill me anyway?" Cedric looked at her, and for the first time, Magnolia saw a crack in his armor. There was a profound, agonizing tenderness in his gaze, a look of a man who had found his greatest treasure, only to realize he had to break it. "I will find another way," he promised, his voice a low, fierce vow. "I did not wait 100 years to find you just to watch you bleed." He left the room, his cloak sweeping behind him like wings. That night, Magnolia couldn't sleep. The fortress groaned around her, the wind whistling through the glass spires. She got up and wandered to the window. In the courtyard below, she saw a figure. It was Cedric. He was standing in the center of a circle of white stones, his shirt discarded despite the freezing cold. His back was to her, and she could see the scars, long, jagged lines that looked like they had been made by claws. He was kneeling, his head bowed, and as she watched, a soft, silver light began to emanate from his skin. It was beautiful, but it was also wrong. It looked like he was being bleached from the inside out. Suddenly, he let out a cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. He collapsed forward, his hands clawing at the frozen earth. Magnolia didn't think. She ran. She fled down the spiral stairs, through the jasmine-scented halls, and out into the biting cold of the courtyard. "Cedric!" she screamed. She reached him just as he was beginning to fade, his form becoming translucent, like smoke in the wind. She threw herself onto him, her warmth clashing with his absolute cold. "Don't go," she sobbed, pressing her face against his neck. "Don't leave me here." As her skin touched his, the mark on her collarbone erupted in a brilliant, blinding silver. The light flowed from her into him, a river of starlight pouring into a parched land. Cedric gasped, his body jolting as if struck by lightning. He became solid again, his skin regaining its marble-like density. He turned in her arms, his eyes wide and wild. "You gave it to me," he whispered, his voice broken. "You gave me your life force." "I didn't want you to hurt," she said, her voice small. He stared at her, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. This time he didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "You are more dangerous to me than any army." "Magnolia Hawklight," he murmured, "because you make me want to live. And a king with a heart is a king who can be broken." From the shadows of the battlements, a pair of yellow eyes watched them. Leopold Ironland stood in the dark, his hand resting on a communication crystal that hummed with a malevolent, golden light. "I found them," he whispered into the stone. "The king is weak. The girl is the key. Send the hounds." Magnolia felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked up at the black towers of the citadel, and for the first time she realized that the fortress wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage, and the monsters were already inside. The morning did not bring the sun. In the Stormheart citadel, the morning was merely a slight thinning of the shadows, a transition from the velvet black of night to a bruised charcoal grey. Magnolia woke in the white fox furs, her skin still tingling from the encounter in the courtyard. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it, the sensation of her spirit pouring out of her like liquid silver, and the way Cedric had felt in her arms. He had been so solid, yet so fragile, a king made of glass and ancient grief. A low fire crackled in the hearth, the scent of cedar and dried lavender clinging to the air. Beside the bed sat a fresh dress of deep emerald wool and a pair of sturdy fur-lined boots. There was no note, but the care in the arrangement spoke of Cedric's silent, heavy-handed protection. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the intricate laces of the bodice. As she touched the mark on her collarbone, she realized the skin there felt different, no longer a scar, but a living part of her, warm and pulsing with a rhythmic light that matched her own heartbeat. She found Cedric in the great hall. It was a cavernous space of ribbed obsidian arches, illuminated by hundreds of floating candles that drifted like slow-motion fireflies. He was staring at a massive tapestry that covered the far wall, a depiction of a great white tree with roots that reached into a sea of stars. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders shifted. "You shouldn't be out of bed. The transfer of essence, it takes a toll on the human heart." "I'm not just a human heart, apparently," Magnolia said, her voice echoing in the vastness. She walked to stand beside him. "I'm a heart stone, whatever that means." Cedric finally looked at her. The violet in his eyes was muted, shadowed by a weariness that seemed to pull at his very soul. "It means you are the anchor for the night. Without the stone, the shadows become hungry. They lose their shape. They become the monsters the world fears." "And you?" she asked softly. "What do you become?" I become the void, he replied, his voice a low rasp. I am the vessel meant to hold the darkness, to give it order and law. Without the stone's light to balance me, I am merely a predator with no end to his hunger. He reached out, his hand hovering near the mark on her neck. He didn't touch her this time, but the heat of his palm was enough to make her breath hitch. The Ironland Council. Leopold, they don't want to save the world, Magnolia. They want to harvest the light, so they can live forever in a world of perpetual grey. They want the power of the king without the burden of the crown. What are the hounds? Magnolia asked, remembering Leopold's whispered threat. Cedric's expression darkened, his jaw setting into a hard, lethal line. Alchemical abominations. The council takes those who have failed them, men like Leopold who have traded their souls for strength, and they graft iron and shadow onto their bones. They are tireless, mindless, and they can track a single drop of Crowvale blood across an ocean of snow. As if summoned by his words, a low, guttural howl ripped through the silence of the citadel. It wasn't the sound of a wolf. It was the sound of metal screaming against metal, a dissonant, unnatural cry that made the floating candles flicker and die. Cedric moved with a speed that blurred the air. He was in front of her in an instant, his smoke-colored sword appearing in his hand. "They are here!" he hissed. "Ambrosia!" The silver-haired woman appeared from a side door, her face grim. "The perimeter is breached, my king. The shadow gate in the lower levels was sabotaged from the inside." "Damien," Magnolia whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "My boss at the tavern, he was always so scared of you, but he was always talking to the council men." "It doesn't matter who opened the door," Cedric said, his hand finding Magnolia's. His grip was iron, but his thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture that was shockingly tender. "What matters is closing it." He turned to Ambrosia. "Take her to the archives. The Crowvale seal will only respond to her. If I fall, you must use the passage to the Sea of Mist." "If you fall," Magnolia gripped his hand tighter, "I'm not leaving you." Cedric looked down at her, and for a fleeting second, the king vanished. In his place was a man who looked terrified. Not of the monsters outside, but of the feeling she was igniting in his chest. "You are the light, Magnolia," he whispered, leaning down until his forehead touched hers. "I am just the shadow that protects it." "Go." Before she could protest, Ambrosia was pulling her away, leading her down a narrow, winding staircase that smelled of old parchment and damp stone. Behind them, the great hall erupted in the sound of breaking glass and the heavy, rhythmic thud of iron paws. The archives were located deep beneath the citadel, carved into the very roots of the mountain. It was a world of silence and dust, where the air felt thick with the weight of unread stories. Thousands of scrolls and leather-bound books lined the shelves, their spines glowing with faint, magical sigils. "In here," Ambrosia urged, pushing Magnolia into a small, circular room at the very back. The room was different from the rest of the citadel. It was warm, the walls covered in faded tapestries of roses and ivy. In the center sat a simple wooden desk, and on it a single dried thistle in a glass jar. "This was your mother's sanctuary," Ambrosia said, her voice softening. "When she served as the herald, she spent her nights here, recording the lineages of the unspoken." Magnolia approached the desk, her heart racing. She felt a strange pull, a sense of familiarity that made her eyes sting. She reached out and touched a worn leather journal. The moment her skin met the cover, the mark on her collarbone flared. The journal didn't just open, it exhaled. A soft, silver mist rose from the pages, forming a shimmering image in the center of the room. It was Celestine. She looked younger than Magnolia remembered, her hair a wild halo of dark curls, her eyes bright with a fierce, desperate intelligence. She was laughing, her hand resting on the shoulder of a man who could only be a younger Cedric. He wasn't the cold, distant king Magnolia knew. He was smiling, his expression full of a brotherly affection that made Magnolia's chest ache. "Cedric," the image of Celestine whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. "The council is coming. They have found the flaw in the alchemical iron. They think they can trap the Heartstone." The image shifted, the colors turning dark and jagged. "If you are seeing this, Magnolia," the vision said, her eyes seemingly finding Magnolia's across the bridge of time, "it means the stone has returned home. I am sorry I had to leave you in the dark. I am sorry I tried to scrub the mark away. I thought if I could make you ordinary, you would be safe." Magnolia reached out, her fingers passing through the mist. "Mother." "But the light cannot be hidden forever," Celestine continued. "The Heartstone is not a battery for a king, Magnolia. It is a choice. Cedric thinks he is a monster because he was born to hold the dark. But he only becomes a monster if the light refuses to shine for him. Love him, Magnolia. Not because you have to, but because he has forgotten how to love himself." The vision dissolved into a swirl of silver dust, leaving the room colder than before. Magnolia stood in the silence, her mother's words echoing in her mind. A choice. "She loved him," Magnolia whispered to Ambrosia, who was standing by the door, tears tracking through the lines on her face. "We all did," Ambrosia replied, "but the council used that love. They told her that if she didn't give them the stone, they would execute every vampire in the citadel. She chose to run, to hide the stone in the only place they would never look, in the life of a new child." Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered. A dull roar echoed from above, followed by the sound of masonry crumbling. "The hounds have reached the great hall," Ambrosia said, her mossy green eyes wide with alarm. "We have to go, Magnolia. The passage is behind the tapestry." "No," Magnolia said, her voice steadying. She felt a surge of heat from the mark, but it wasn't a burn this time. It was a flame. "I'm not running. My mother ran to save the stone. I'm staying to save the king." She turned and ran back toward the stairs, ignoring Ambrosia's cries. She climbed, her lungs burning, her boots thudding against the obsidian steps. She burst through the doors of the great hall and skidded to a halt. The scene was a nightmare. The great hall was filled with a thick, yellow fog that smelled of sulfur and rot. 3 massive creatures, looking like wolves made of rusted iron and stitched flesh, were circling Cedric. They moved with a jerky, mechanical precision, their yellow eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Cedric was wounded. A long, jagged tear ran down his arm, and his cloak was shredded. He was breathing in heavy, ragged gasps, his sword arm trembling. In the center of the fog stood Leopold Ironland. He was no longer the blacksmith from Oakhaven. His skin had been replaced by plates of dull grey iron, and his voice, when he spoke, sounded like a chorus of screaming souls. "Yield, Stormheart," Leopold commanded. "Give us the girl, and we will let you fade in peace. The age of kings is over. The age of the alchemist has begun." Cedric spat a mouthful of dark blood onto the floor. "I have outlived 1,000 men like you, Leopold. I will outlive you as well." Leopold laughed, a cold, clanking sound. "You have no Heartstone. You are a candle flickering in a hurricane." "He has me!" Magnolia screamed. She stepped into the hall, her presence cutting through the yellow fog like a blade. Every eye, human, monster, and vampire, turned toward her. Leopold's yellow eyes flared with greed. "The vessel! Secure her!" The hounds lunged. Magnolia didn't have a sword. She didn't have magic. She had only the heat in her blood and the memory of her mother's voice. As the first hound leaped toward her, its iron jaws snapping inches from her face, Magnolia didn't flinch. She reached out, her hand finding the cold, rusted metal of the creature's chest. "Stop," she commanded. The mark on her collarbone didn't just glow, it exploded. A wave of pure white light radiated from her, hitting the hound with the force of a physical impact. The alchemical runes on the creature's hide flared, turned red, and then disintegrated. The hound let out a metallic whimper, and collapsed into a pile of lifeless iron and rotting meat. The silence that followed was absolute. Cedric stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Leopold, however, looked enraged. "You waste the essence," he roared, drawing a heavy iron mace that hummed with a sickly golden light. "That light belongs to the council." He lunged at her, his movement surprisingly fast for his bulk. Cedric moved to intercept, but he was too slow, his wounds dragging at his agility. "Magnolia, get back!" Cedric cried out. Leopold's mace swung in a wide, lethal arc. Magnolia felt the air whistle past her ear as she ducked, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She realized then that she couldn't just use the light. She had to control it. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into the center of her chest, searching for the core of the heat. She found it, a spinning, radiant sun that felt as old as the world itself. She didn't try to pull it out. She simply opened the door. The light didn't just hit Leopold, it consumed the fog. The yellow sulfur was burned away, replaced by a brilliant silver radiance that illuminated every corner of the great hall. Leopold screamed, his iron plates glowing white-hot. He stumbled back, his mace clattering to the floor. The remaining hounds whined and retreated into the shadows, their artificial lives flickering out in the presence of the pure essence. Cedric seized the moment. He drove his smoke sword into the gap in Leopold's armor, right where the heart should have been. Leopold froze. His yellow eyes dimmed, the golden light within them guttering like a dying candle. You cannot stop. The council," he wheezed. "There are hundreds more, already on the mountain." With a final grinding sound, Leopold collapsed, his iron form shattering into 1,000 pieces. The light from Magnolia's mark began to fade, leaving her swaying on her feet. The adrenaline that had carried her was gone, replaced by a crushing, soul-deep exhaustion. Cedric was by her side in a heartbeat. He caught her before she could hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her with a fierce, desperate strength. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered, his voice shaking. He pulled her close, his face buried in the crook of her neck. "You could have burned yourself out. You could have died." "I couldn't let him take you," she murmured, her eyes fluttering shut. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his expression a chaotic map of pain and love. "Magnolia, look at me." She forced her eyes open. Cedric was leaning in, his breath cool against her lips. For a long, suspended moment, the world stopped. The broken glass, the smell of sulfur, the threat of the council. It all vanished, leaving only the two of them in the center of the ruins. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two worlds, a desperate, hungry exchange of life and shadow. It tasted of salt and ancient cedar, of cold nights and the promise of a sunrise. Magnolia felt the silver light within her surge, meeting the darkness within him, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the king was whole. But the moment was shattered by a sound from the battlements. Ambrosia appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "Cedric, the mountain, it's moving." They ran to the windows. Below them, the forest of Oakhaven was gone. In its place was a sea of iron and fire. Thousands of council soldiers, led by high alchemists in golden robes, were ascending the spire, and at the head of the army rode a man in white silk, holding a staff that pulsed with the light of a captured star. "The Grand Alchemist," Cedric hissed, his hand tightening on his sword. Damien Fairford. Magnolia looked at the man she had served tea to for 5 years. He wasn't the coward she thought he was. He was the architect of her mother's death, and he was coming to finish the job. "We can't win this, Cedric," Magnolia said, her voice trembling as she saw the sheer scale of the army. Cedric looked at her, his eyes burning with a new, dangerous resolve. "We don't have to win, Magnolia. We just have to survive long enough to reach the sea of mist. And then what?" "And then," Cedric said, a dark smile playing on his lips, "we show them what happens when the king of the unspoken stops playing by the rules of men." But as he spoke, a beam of golden light shot from Damien's staff, hitting the glass spire of the citadel. The ground beneath them groaned, and the floor of the great hall began to tilt toward the abyss. The Stormheart citadel did not merely break, it mourned. As the beam from Damien's staff struck the central spire, the obsidian glass shivered, sending a sound like 1,000 weeping violins through the halls. The floor beneath Magnolia and Cedric tilted violently, sending fragments of the great hall's history sliding toward the gaping maw of the abyss below. "Hold on to me!" Cedric's voice was a command that cut through the roar of the mountain's collapse. He caught Magnolia's waist, pulling her flush against his chest as the ground vanished where she had stood a second before. They were suspended for a heartbeat in the freezing air, the blizzard howling around them. Below, the iron army of the council looked like a colony of ants, their torches flickering like dying stars. Cedric didn't fall, he descended. His cloak billowed out, catching the updrafts of the storm, his strength amplified by the silver light still humming in his veins from their kiss. They landed on a narrow, treacherous ledge halfway down the spire, shielded from the direct line of fire. Ambrosia was already there, her silver hair whipped into a frenzy by the wind. She was kneeling over a stone trapdoor, her fingers tracing ancient runes that glowed a faint, desperate blue. "The citadel is lost," Ambrosia shouted over the thunder of falling masonry. "The Grand Alchemist has tapped into the ley lines. He is draining the mountain itself to power his machines." Magnolia looked up. The Black Fortress, the only home Cedric had known for centuries, was dissolving into shadows and dust. "Why?" she whispered, the cold biting into her skin despite the warmth of Cedric's arm. "Why destroy it all just for me?" "Because you are the only thing he cannot synthesize in a lab," Cedric replied, his eyes fixed on the golden glow of Damien's army. "He can build iron men and golden staves, but he cannot create life that breathes starlight. Without you, his empire of iron will eventually rust into nothing." The trapdoor groaned open, revealing a tunnel that smelled of salt and ancient, stagnant water. "The Sea of Mist," Ambrosia urged. "It is the only path left. It leads to the edge of the world, where the Council's logic fails." As they descended into the dark, the sounds of the battle faded, replaced by the rhythmic, heavy thud of Cedric's boots and the frantic drumming of Magnolia's heart. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with a phosphorescent moss that pulsed in time with the mark on Magnolia's collarbone. "You're shaking," Cedric noted. He didn't stop, but he shifted his grip, his thumb tracing the pulse point at her wrist. "I spent my life serving tea and wondering if I'd have enough wood for the winter," Magnolia said, her voice echoing in the damp passage. "Now I'm the anchor for the night and the heart stone." I don't know how to be those things, Cedric. I'm just Magnolia. That is exactly why you are the stone, Cedric said, pausing for a moment to look back at her. The violet in his eyes was soft now, devoid of the predatory sharpness. The stone requires a vessel that understands the value of a single candle. My mother was a queen of the unspoken. She saw the world in terms of realms and centuries. But your mother, Celestine, saw the world in terms of the tea she served and the daughter she loved. She made the stone human. She gave it a heartbeat. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers in the darkness of the tunnel. The scent of him, cedar and the coming rain, acted as an anchor, pulling her back from the ledge of her own terror. You don't have to be a legend, Magnolia. You just have to be the woman who looked at a monster and told him his tea was too hot. A soft, sad laugh escaped her, but the moment was shattered by a sound from behind them, a rhythmic, metallic clanking that was moving through the tunnel with terrifying speed. "The hounds!" Magnolia gasped. "No," Cedric hissed, his hand flying to his sword. "Something worse. Damien has sent his elite, the Iron Guard." The tunnel behind them erupted in a flash of golden light. Figures clad in suits of heavy, articulated gold armor stepped into view. They didn't breathe. They hummed. Their helmets were faceless plates of polished metal, reflecting Magnolia's terrified face back at her. "Ambrosia, take her to the shore," Cedric commanded, pushing Magnolia toward the silver-haired woman. "I will hold them here." "Cedric, no!" Magnolia cried, reaching for him. "Go!" he roared, his sword flaring into a brilliant obsidian fire. "If they take you, there is no sunrise for anyone." Magnolia was pulled away by Ambrosia, the sound of Cedric's sword clashing against golden armor ringing in her ears like a death knell. She looked back once, seeing him standing alone in the narrow tunnel, a shadow king fighting a golden tide, and she felt the heartstone within her scream in protest. The tunnel opened not into another cave, but into a world that felt like it had been painted in watercolors and then left out in the rain. The sea of mist was not water. It was a vast, undulating expanse of silver vapor that stretched to the horizon, where a pale, oversized moon hung permanently in a sky of deep indigo. There was no wind here, only a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Ambrosia led her to the edge of the silver shore, where the sand was made of crushed pearls. A single boat waited there, a skiff carved from the bone of a leviathan, its sail a web of gossamer silk. "We have to wait for him," Magnolia insisted, her eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. "I won't leave without him." "He will come," Ambrosia said, though her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at the horizon, her mossy eyes clouded with worry. "But the sea of mist is a mirror, Magnolia. It shows you what you need, not what you want. If the king's heart is heavy with his own darkness, the sea will swallow him." Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant sound of the mountain's continued collapse. Then a shadow emerged from the tunnel. Cedric stumbled onto the pearl sand. He was a wreck. His armor was shattered, and his white skin was crisscrossed with golden burns that smoked in the cold air. He was leaning heavily on his sword, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. Magnolia was at his side in a second, her hands hovering over his wounds. "Cedric! Oh, saints! I stopped them," he wheezed, falling to his knees. The silver light in his eyes was nearly gone, replaced by a dull, aching grey. "But Damien! He's coming! He doesn't need the tunnel. He's coming from above." As if on cue, the indigo sky was torn open. A massive, iron-clad airship, draped in the golden banners of the council, descended through the mist. It looked like a predatory beetle, its engines roaring with the sound of 1,000 trapped souls. In the prow stood Damien Fairford. He looked down at them, his white silk robes pristine, his staff glowing with a light that was a perversion of the Heartstone's radiance. "The ends of the earth," Damien's voice boomed, amplified by the alchemical speakers of the ship. A fitting place for a dead king and a stolen gem to meet their end. Cedric tried to stand, but his legs gave way. He looked at Magnolia, his expression one of profound apology. I can't protect you this time." Magnolia looked at the airship, then at the dying light in Cedric's eyes, and finally at the mark on her own collarbone. She remembered her mother's vision in the archives. The Heartstone is not a battery. It is a choice. She realized then that she had been waiting for Cedric to save her, for the king to wield the power. But the power wasn't his. It was hers. "Ambrosia," Magnolia said, her voice calm and steady. "Get him into the boat." "Magnolia, what are you doing?" Cedric reached for her, his fingers brushing the hem of her emerald dress. "I'm serving tea to a guest who overstayed his welcome," she said, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. She stepped away from the boat, walking toward the center of the pearl dust shore. The airship hovered directly above her, the golden light from Damien's staff focusing on her like a spotlight. "Give it to me, girl," Damien shouted. "Surrender the essence, and I will let the monster live as a mortal." "You don't understand, Damien," Magnolia called out, her voice ringing clear across the sea of mist. "You think the stone is power. You think it's a weapon. But my mother taught me something different." She closed her eyes. She didn't reach for the heat this time. She reached for the love she felt for the broken king on the sand. She reached for the memories of her mother's touch, for the smell of the tavern, for the simple, quiet beauty of a world that didn't need kings or alchemists. "The stone isn't for you," she whispered. "It's for the night." She tore the laces of her bodice, exposing the mark. It wasn't a tattoo anymore. It was a window. A pillar of pure, unadulterated silver light erupted from her chest. It wasn't a flash. It was a fountain. The sea of mist responded, the silver vapors rising to meet the light, forming a cyclone of radiance that swallowed the shore. The world became a symphony of white and silver. Magnolia felt herself dissolving. She wasn't a waitress, wasn't a girl, wasn't even human. She was the wind, the mist, and the moonlight. She saw the iron airship as if through a microscope. She saw the rust in the gears, the greed in Damien's heart, and the cold mechanical logic that held the whole thing together. She reached out with her mind. She didn't strike the ship. She simply removed the shadows it relied on. Without the darkness to provide contrast, the alchemical gold lost its luster. The engines, powered by stolen essence, found nothing to consume. The massive ship began to groan, its iron plates buckling as the sea of mist reclaimed the space it occupied. "No!" Damien's scream was muffled by the roar of the light. "It belongs to me. I am the architect." "You are a man who forgot how to feel the cold," Magnolia's voice echoed within the light. The airship didn't explode. It simply faded, like a drawing being erased by a steady hand. The golden banners, the iron hull, and the grand alchemist himself were rubbed out of existence by the sheer, overwhelming purity of the Heartstone's release. On the shore, Cedric watched in awe. The golden burns on his skin were being washed away by the silver rain falling from the cyclone. He felt his strength returning. But it was different. It was no longer a hunger, but a fullness. The void within him was gone, replaced by a steady, gentle warmth. The light began to contract. The cyclone slowed, the silver vapors settling back into the sea of mist. In the center of the shore, Magnolia stood, her emerald dress tattered, her hair a wild spill of dark silk. She swayed, and this time it was Cedric who was there to catch her. He was whole, his marble skin glowing with a healthy lunar radiance. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world of ghosts. "Is it gone?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The council is broken," Cedric said, his voice thick with emotion. "The mountain has fallen, and the iron is dust. You did it, Magnolia. You ended the curse." "And the stone?" Cedric touched the mark on her collarbone. It was gone. The skin was smooth, flawless, and warm. "The stone is where it belongs," he murmured, his hand moving to rest over her heart. "It's just a heartbeat now. Your heartbeat." The sky above the sea of mist began to change. For the first time in the history of the unspoken, the indigo started to pale. A sliver of gold appeared on the horizon, not the artificial gold of the alchemists, but the soft, true gold of a rising sun. "The sun," Ambrosia whispered from the skiff, her face bathed in the new light. "The night is over." Cedric looked at the horizon, then back at Magnolia. He was no longer a king of shadows. He was a man standing on a shore at the dawn of a new world. "What happens now?" Magnolia asked, her fingers entreating his. "Now," Cedric said, lifting her into the bone skiff. "We go to the lands beyond the mist. No crowns, no tattoos, just us." The skiff glided silently across the silver vapor, leaving a trail of ripples that caught the first true rays of the morning sun. Behind them, the ruins of the Stormheart citadel were swallowed by the clouds, a monument to a dark age that had finally found its peace. Magnolia leaned her head against Cedric's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The weight of the Heartstone was gone, but the bond it had forged remained, a thread of silver and shadow that defied both time and alchemy. She was no longer a waitress from Oakhaven, and he was no longer a king of the night. They were simply two souls who had found home in the middle of a storm. As the boat moved toward the unknown, the air smelled of salt and freedom. The curse was broken, the crown was fallen, and the path ahead was unwritten. In the end, it wasn't the blood of kings or the gold of alchemists that saved the world. It was the truth told by a waitress to a stranger in the cold. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice. If you enjoyed this tale of shadows, light, and a love that defied the ages, please like, share, and subscribe for more epic romantic sagas. Join us next time as we explore the secrets hidden in the hearts of the unspoken.